Hi, everybody. Taylor here in response to vlog 7, which was Ashley's vlog. And this week we focused on multiple identities and some intersectionality as well. And the article that Ashley really enjoyed was the Abe's article. I can't remember all of this is what I wrote down in my notes, but the Abe's article, which was the first article in Blazeview. I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it because I thought her questions were really interesting, and I actually wrote out some things to kind of keep me from being scatterbrained or whatever you want to call it. So the first question that she posed was, in looking at your own personal identities, do you live your life based off of the original model of multiple dimensions of identity or the model that incorporates meaning making? Now for this one, it was really hard for me to answer because I feel like these are very situational that you can't necessarily say. I mean, you could, but for me personally, I can't necessarily say that I live my life based off of one model or the other. I feel like it's when I'm in a certain situation, my identity might be, it might be, say for example, I'm in a sorority, so when I'm with my, in chapter meeting, or I'm with my line sisters, or I'm with at a chapter event, or a Delta event, just in general, I am a Delta. In my mind, I am a Delta at that point. But there are also other times where my identities not necessarily clash, but they kind of intersect. Just kind of when they were talking about intersectionality, which is I'm going to read a quote here in a second. There are other times when, say, in my women of color discussion group in undergrad. It was, of course, it was for all people, but the group was named Women of Color, but all races were invited to attend. And at that moment, there were a lot of times where I went back and forth with my identities. Almost it seemed like they were mixing together between being an African American as well as a woman. So those two identities were always one and the same almost when I was in those women of color discussion groups. So I think that that's kind of answering the question, but I'm gonna give more of a solid answer just, to kind of show you all my thought process on this if I were to give a solid answer. But that's kind of like, I guess, two good examples of how I could be a Delta and one just, I'm just strictly Delta. I just feel like I identify with Delta right now, um, which was kind of like the basic or the original model, whereas the meaning making is kind of the, um, I guess, the women of color discussion group or intersectionality or something like that. So the one quote that I did read or that I kind of pick up on, I thought it was really interesting, is that it's about intersectionality. Is no one dimension can be understood singularly. It can only be understood in relation to other dimensions. And that's what I thought about with my women of color discussion group, that in relation to being a woman and also relation to being a woman of, well, a black African American, that those identities are very relational in the sense of how I live my daily life and how I understand myself. Whereas other identities are kind of not necessarily less important, but they don't cross my mind as much, I guess. Just like me being middle class, being raised in middle class. That doesn't necessarily cross my mind as much unless it's presented to me in a situation where I have to actually think about it. So, but those things are very relational. Being growing up, middle class African American woman can definitely be different than someone who is lower SES or even higher SES, Latino male, something like that. So, it stood out to me because I think the quote personally stood out to me because I think it's a great way to summarize how your multiple identities can create your whole self. Because a lot of things are in relation to each other and not necessarily put into one, every identity is put into one box, that sometimes you have to pull, almost like the mixed race identity. I think, yeah, the mixed race identity, where I know a question was posed, do you kind of like tap into both of your identities at the same time, being, Caucasian and, black, do you tap into those identities at the same time all the time, or do you go with one or the other? So that's what that kind of reminded me of as well. Um, so just to actually answer the question, babbling, just to actually answer the question, but if I could pick one, I would say that I live my life based off of the transitional meaning making model. I'm just now starting to realize that some of my assumptions and beliefs about myself and the world are based off of gender roles and racial attitudes. In the Abe's article and others, the Abe's and others article, it states that the women's stories reflect tensions, or I think Carmen's story or Carmen is one of the women, reflect tensions and conflict within their identity. I can relate to this because I do ask myself those hard questions about my identity, especially when it comes to gender roles. I sometimes question my ways of thinking about relationships when comparing them to stereotypical statements about how women are supposed to conduct themselves when in relationships with men or in general, friendships, whatever. I can also relate to the frustration and identity labels that are insufficient to describe who I am. For example, identifying as a black woman can mean so many things because being black and being a woman have their own place within my identity, but they also mix. Um, I think that both of the labels I think both of the labels can't be defined by anyone but the person that claims them as their own, and not necessarily aligning with what society believes them to be. I guess that's kind of like my daily struggle. But I also think that my identities are very relational to one another. That might be kind of contradicting, but I think that with this multiple identity things, or this multiple identity theory and this model, that it can be kind of contradicting when you're trying to explain how you live your life, especially with this specific question, like how you live your life based off of one model or the other. It can be kind of contradicting because things can mix and then things don't. So that's the answer to the first question. And then the second question was, in your own experiences, please describe why the meaning making model proves to be more successful than the original model. Um, I think the meaning making model is definitely more contextual than the other models because um, it allows, I think, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm just going to basically read what I said, or read what I wrote. I think of it as putting. I was just thinking about this not too long ago. I think of it as putting on different lenses. I think formulaic. I think I'm saying it right. Formulaic meaning making is like wearing sunglasses because you recognize that stereotypes or social constructs are prevalent, but you shade yourself and try to protect yourself from them and try not to base your identity off of them, but some of the sun rays still affect your eyes. I'm hoping this is making sense, or that I'm reading it right, or that I just even understand, but this is how I interpreted it. And then you see the stereotypes, you shade yourself from them, but end up still being affected and associating yourself with them in some cases. Similar to the case with Amy in the Abe's and others article. Because even though she was dismissing stereotypes, she was also basing some of her identities off of the stereotypes at the same time. And then with transitional meaning making can be similar to wearing reading glasses. Um, the lines are blurred on the page. If you need reading glasses, the lines are blurred on the page until you put the reading glasses on. You know and understand that you can't see clearly without the reading glasses, but it's up to you whether you choose to put them on or not. Put them on to read or squint to read, which was the case with Carmen when she decided to allow her family to influence how she acted in relation to her sexual identity. Still again, if that doesn't make sense, I apologize, but this is just my thought process. I'm just kind of like talking here. And then for the last one, foundational meaning making, I thought of these as wearing bifocals because everything is magnified, and I think that relates to the identities of a person. If a person is very sure of who they are, then they are able to be consistent with that identity no matter the situation, and outside forces do not affect that. Um, and then being able to look at every detail of a situation and remain the same, just as people who need bifocals, or who wear bifocals. Most of the time, they're older people, maybe younger people. I'm not really sure. I don't know if that's ageism right there, but um, or being ageist. I don't know, but I thought about this as they're consistently wearing them. Whereas the sunglasses, you put them on when it's sunny outside, or if something is, um, your eyes are really exposed to something, you want to shade them. Whereas reading glasses, you can either put them on or you don't. And where most people who wear bifocals, their eyes, they really can't see without them regardless. And so then I think that by putting that on and the picture is magnified, it's almost like when Jackie was talking about like her identities were very clear and um, very complex, but she also understood who she was in relation to other things. She remained consistent, just like as if someone was wearing bifocals, they remain consistent in their the clear picture of what they see on a daily basis, which could, I guess, be a metaphor. What they see, how they see themselves and their identities is very clear, no matter what the situation. So everything remains consistent instead of using sunglasses or reading glasses. Um, so after that little spiel, I think it does prove to be more successful because it's kind of like you can almost like other models where you can move through these areas or these lenses as I just created, and you can kind of understand how you relate you can understand how your identities relate to society. They relate to in Amy's situation to society, or societal beliefs or cultural beliefs, as in Carmen's situation, and then you can um, come to this moment where it's just like no matter the situation, my identities are clear. How I feel about, me being an African American woman, 23 years old, I guess, millennial generation, I guess that could be an identity, educated, natural can be an identity, I'm not sure. Um, Middle class, SCS, those identities can be very, very clear. And I remember reading in the Abe's and Others article about things that are closer to your core, whereas others are kind of, to the outside. And that would definitely remind me of oh gosh, the model with the exosystem. I can't remember the exact name of it, but things that are closer to you, and as you move out farther, things that might influence you. But it's with your identity. So the things that you really do identify with are kind of like are closer to you, and then things, your identities. It makes you sound like a schizophrenic, but your identities that you don't necessarily tap into all the time, or not necessarily. You don't necessarily have to you don't necessarily I keep saying necessarily, but you don't always identify, I guess, consciously identify with those things unless the situation is presented, if that makes sense. So I think it's more successful because it allows people to kind of like it gives more fluidity within the model, instead of this is my identity at this point, this is my identity at this point in time, and it kind of allows the identities to mesh and it not necessarily pushes you through, but it kind of allows you to reflect on your outside influences versus how you feel or what you feel to identify with. So I think it's more successful in that approach or in that aspect of the meaning making model. So I hope all of that made sense. I tend to ramble on these things because I'm really trying to understand what each article is talking about, as well as relating them to past theories that we learned about. Just trying to make it all connect. So I hope that made sense. Oh wow, 15 minutes. This was my video, my response for vlog 7, group 2. So I hope everybody understands, and have a great night.